Hello, I'm Adele Gladman and I'm here with Amber Wilson at the end of our conference Making Justice Work, which was held at Leeds Trinity University on the 5th of January. And Amber and I just wanted to share with you what we thought was the key learning from today's event. So Amber, what were the parts that have stuck with you from today?
I think, as always, really, at these events, the most powerful thing for me was the accounts and the voices from survivors and from those closely related to them. They were the most emotional. They are the words that reflect most powerfully to me. A father saying, nobody personally apologized to my son. Nobody in the system imagined what it was be like to be him. And that things need to change and that they're still fighting for change.
And that family's still fighting for change, still fighting for justice years after the first incident of abuse. And I say the first incident of abuse because, of course, that particular case, that young person was abused again and again and again, which is so often what we hear about.
And even when they get that justice, the consequences will still be lifelong. As T said herself, the consequence, those years will never be given back. And I heard that from several people. I heard that from the historic survival on the panel, the father and T. Those years don't come back. So the earlier we can recognise it, the better.
And that ties in with something that Dr. Kate Ward talked about. She was talking about the impact of trauma, and particularly the impact of what she was calling toxic stress on the architecture of the brain, but also on the body, the effect that it has physically. In terms of, she said that people who have experienced toxic stress, particularly victims of child sexual abuse, are 1.5 times more likely to develop significant health problems if there isn't an intervention. But I also took something very positive from her session, because what she was saying is that the flexibility of the child's developing brain allows for change to happen. But what she also said is actually that remains the case with survivors. It's harder once you become an adult, but there's never too late a time for a good intervention. But obviously the earlier the better.
No, we see that in our historic work a lot. There is still a lot of work to do, but it is possible to break through and to make changes. It doesn't mean it's always going to be perfect, but it is there. Sharon's example of that.
Absolutely. And I think what I heard today was a real mixture of very powerful, very difficult messages, but also some very positive ones. And some of the things that T said in her opening address about how at first she was terrified that her child was going to be a product of evil, of how she had to explain to her child that she was a product of rape, and that was totally unsupported. We heard from Sharon later on about how there was a knock at the door, and that knock at the door nearly ended her 12-year-old marriage. Dr. Dominic Wilmot, I sat in his session, which was about decision making in rape trials, and one of the things that he was saying was that even with all of the improvements in reporting and investigation, in the CPS taking cases forward, the conviction rate for reported crime, sexual crime, is still less than 7%.
And I think that is part of the attitude change that also the parent talked about. We need a change in attitude. Victim blaming is a key point of that, but also understanding that those myths are out there, and that therefore if you're working under a jury system, you need to do a lot more explaining by experts about what grooming is about, and we need to make sure that the press is very clear about how they report these things, that you always look behind the story and the behaviour and look at the individual and think about what they may be going through, that there may be a reason. So in the talk, for example, by Dr. Danielle McDermott, she was saying, you know, violent behaviour is often just simply an expression of emotions being expressed in possibly the wrong way, but that's the only way the emotion can be expressed at that point in time. That isn't a person being aggressive, that's a person feeling that's the only way they can express their emotions. And that we need to always look at that person, not the behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that one of your colleagues summed it up perfectly at the end when she asked a question, and she said that the current system is not fit for purpose, and I absolutely agree with that. But there were some really good learning outcomes from today. There were some very positive things. I heard a police officer talk about how preventing crime is actually one of our priorities, which was incredibly refreshing to hear a police officer say. And of course we heard an incredible presentation by the Crown Prosecution Service about the Section 28 pilots. You sat in on that session. What did you hear?
I think it was really, I mean, although progress is slow, and they themselves admit that, it was just really encouraging to see that that process is being put in place and being followed through now. So the fact that people can be cross-examined on a video, no, cross-examination is still really traumatic. The fact that it can happen on a video doesn't have to take place in court. The fact that people are taking into consideration that maybe if a child is very young, it's probably not best to wear really, you know, formal uniforms and wigs and things like that, and to make it as child friendly as possible, to bring the process forward in time to make that happen. And they are seeing that isn't just a cost and an issue they're doing for the sake of it. There's a benefit for the victims as well as for the Crown Prosecution Service to them. So that's a really positive message. Although cross-examination in itself is really traumatic, it still takes quite a long time. They've brought it forward, yes, great. However, there's still a lot of work to do. And what I found really encouraging at the end of today was the fire. You know, Gemma mentioned you have to keep the fire in your belly as an advice. There is still fire out there. Some people, especially, you know, my colleague has been disillusioned recently by a couple of experiences through the criminal justice process, but at the same time there is still fire out there to get that change going. Among the audience today, several times we heard, well, this has got to change, and it wasn't like, oh, we can't change anything. It was like, this has got to change and we've got to do something, even at the end of today. So I thought that was really encouraging, that people are still willing to fight to make justice work.
Absolutely. And you know, we heard from speakers, we heard from Gemma at the end about how all professionals working with children and vulnerable adults need to be trained in trauma and understand behaviour. We heard that incredible presentation at the end from Emma Harewood about the Barnahus and the revolutionary, I don't think that's an exaggeration, the revolutionary change that the Barnahus is bringing for child victims, not for adult victims of child sexual abuse and exploitation. And you know, I think that probably brings us to the final challenge that we left the audience, and actually we'd like to invite you at home to join in. What we asked the audience to do using the hashtag Making Justice Work is to tweet one thing that they think could be done differently, whether that's relating to a personal experience that you've had, a professional experience that you've had. What do you think needs to change about the criminal justice system and how it treats child and vulnerable adult witnesses in the system today?
Absolutely. Let's make this work better.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.